The Drivatar system in Forza, it's not problematic, but like there could be a way to make it problematic. If you started feeling like the Drivatar was more efficient than you, and that the best way for you to get the next set of races unlocked would be to sit there and watch your Drivatar drive for 40 minutes and then set a timer and then be back in exactly 40 minutes to send it again, and you never actually get to do any racing, that would be terrible. So I think it has more to do with like implementation and less to do with the idea.
Conjure Alpha signs in and says, I think it's more like you click a button and the game plays itself, that it's a common practice for MMOs. And so that's the concern. It's not something asynchronous like the Garrison or the Retainer, is that you can set down a button and the game's going to play for itself. What do you think?
So I played a Pokemon game like that pretty heavily, and I play some mobile games that are like that pretty heavily, and that's fine. That does not replace or even compete with what part of my brain wants MMOs. At that point, it's just in a totally different space in my brain. Like I've definitely made room for things like that in my life, but if it's literally just I could be running a dungeon and then when I go to let my dog in, I can just have it run itself, that is no longer a tier 1 experience anymore. That is a lower tier.
My thought on that, when it comes down to the combat and being that we like, it's all like hearsay and speculation, like at the moment, comes down to is that if it's something you just hit play and it plays itself and you're not interested in it, that seems like we're just building in our own little automation bot, which people do. Like, Veritas says that, free to play is as rampant with those kind of players because there's no real financial risk or disincentive to do that to your account. And so the thing I wonder though is because the other piece of this is called action combat. They keep saying action combat, and without having played the combat, like the next question that I see on my videos is like, is this true action combat? So there's still like a degree of like, what does that even mean? And the only real way is that we have to see somebody actually playing the game to see, is this soft target, tab target, hybrid, combat action gameplay. And I wonder if it is that action combat, action driven online MMORPG, is this essentially what we've seen in terms of automation, like we've seen in Final Fantasy 16, a way of just easing it in from a just an accessibility perspective, as opposed to like the game's actually playing itself. It's like, hey, we're just going to turn on this feature to try and make it more accessible and enjoyable for a wider range of people. Destiny 2 recently did that. They turned on a feature where it's auto fire on all of it, which the end result of Destiny's feature turn on is it is the most effective way to play the game. And so it's not really an option. It literally, you just go turn that on because you're losing out on DPS by not having it on, because it is at the maximum fire rate cap to have that feature on. Do you think accessibility ends up becoming a mandatory thing if that ends up being the case?
Accessibility is a hard thing to manage because the range of which somebody needs help is enormous. When we start to talk about just accessibility in a much broader sense, like it's one of the few things that the United States makes a pretty substantial effort in, pretty successfully compared to the vast majority of the rest of the world. Is we think of accessibility as being a word as everything from you're born with something, maybe you're colorblind, you only have one hand, to something that's an injury. What happens if somebody is just hurt temporarily, to things that can be very can pass with time. So like, how does a pregnant woman get into a space if it has too many stairs? And so like accessibility from under protection under like the ADA in the United States is a very broad term. And in gaming, it's really undefined. Colorblindness is more common in men than women. Gaming is stereotypically more male-driven than female. That is slowly going away, but during that time, like, how do you address the fact that means that colorblindness is going to be fairly common? Also, how do you deal with just differences in literal access? If we're using the word access and we just remove accessibility, how do you just deal with hardware limitations, internet limitations, all these things. Everybody has a different point. We have 7-year-olds playing the same game as a 40-year-old. They're just a wildly different point developmentally. And so we have all of these different things going on simultaneously. How you balance that is really tough, because the moment you make something easy for one group that might have an uphill battle that seems unfair, the group that doesn't have that same uphill battle is of course going to take advantage of that. Like, of course. All I have to, like, I get an easier version if I just tell you that I'm struggling with this. That naturally gets taken advantage of. So I don't know where the perfect line is. It's something that you can feel when it's better. And so I think that ends up being kind of trial and error. Like different games are going to try accessibility different ways. And once a game has something like a colorblind mode that's really good, just to focus on a really easy documented one, every other game is suddenly an idiot for not having it. So like that's how accessibility moves forward, is we slowly realize like the seizure warnings are standard now.
Yeah.
I'm not affected by seizures, but a seizure warning doesn't bother me at all, and having a setting doesn't bother me at all. So like that seems
it's
like
weird
really
whenever you don't have it. Like there's been a handful of games that it's like, wait a minute, why didn't they have that? Like what's going on here? How did that get to the point where it isn't, I guess, mandated, but it just becomes that zeitgeist of like, oh, this is just something we're going to go ahead and do. And then when you see somebody miss and ends up missing in a very public way.
When was the first big like move towards seizure warnings? It hasn't been that long. But like for the fact that it feels weird when there's a lot of flashing and stuff on a screen and it's not a seizure warning, it didn't take us very long to get used to them.
Mm-hmm. Now in Twitch chat, Cloud RDS says single player accessibility is also way different than multiplayer. Sure. Making a single player game too easy, it doesn't harm anybody else. But like in this case with Destiny, it's like, yeah, why wouldn't I have that on? I'm theoretically not at my best if I don't have it on. And there's no like, hey, this other guy who doesn't need this also, like, there's no like way to sit here and like have this gentleman's agreement of like, okay, well, I get that we don't need it, so we're not going to go ahead and use it, because that's one of the things that made 16 so fascinating, is that by turning on the different bangles and making the game overall have an easier play experience, it highlights that, so that from a gameplay recording and streaming perspective, it's not like, oh man, this was super like, all right, like, hey guys, because even in a single player game, what would be the counterpoint to that would be streaming culture, content creation. Like, I beat the game on the ultimate hardest setting, in record time. And it's like, oh, clearly you didn't, because here's all the different things you had in your recording, So I think essentially I do agree with that overall in principle, but content creation and streaming can end up kind of changing up a part of that. Imagine like, trying to race to finish the game as quickly as possible, speed runs. Like that's something that happens that I think is a truly interesting, piece of content, but I don't know if there's a way around it. Well, and the thing, Cloud RDS says speedruns have rules. It's like, yeah, and that'd be one way you were able to enforce the rule set visibly, in this regard, as opposed to like hoping that, something didn't happen in this case.